Thanks. We will be back in a minute following a short introductory video for our first panel discussion of gridXdays this year. We'll be back in a second talking about energy literacy. According to a 2023 survey, 3/4 of consumers are confused by nightmare energy bills. A lack of simplified language leads many to feel stress when opening their energy bills, and further frustration when trying to understand fluctuating costs. Clear, concise energy literacy is key. But who is responsible for fostering it? And how can we ensure that accurate information is passed on? This panel, Energy Literacy, the next step in climate literacy, discusses the necessity of energy literacy and how it will benefit the fight against climate change. Hello and welcome back. We are just about to kick off our first panel discussion for this year's GridXdays, and we are talking about energy literacy, the next step in climate literacy. To discuss this, we have Malgorzata Wiatros-Motyka, who is a senior electricity analyst at Ember. Before her role with the energy think tank Ember, Malgorzata was with the IEA Clean Coal Centre, where she was integral to several international projects, including country sectoral analysis for the US DOS. She's authored various policy-relevant reports on the energy sector, covering a range of diverse issues from methanol production to state-of-the-art emissions control and sustainable power in emerging markets. Malgorzata, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It is a pleasure to be part of the discussion.
Great to hear, thank you. And joining her, we also have Charmaine Coutinho, who you may recognise from last year. Charmaine is Head of Client Training at LCP Delta. Charmaine has over 16 years of consultancy experience focusing on new business and service and the capability development in the energy transition. She currently heads up LCP Delta's external training and knowledge development for clients interested in how the energy transition and net zero will impact them. Charmaine, welcome back.
Hi, it's lovely to be back again.
And unfortunately, our third panel speaker hasn't joined yet, so we may be joined later, but we will kick off the discussion nonetheless. So, without further ado, Malgorzata, what is most important for people to understand about the energy market, about energy pricing, or their energy consumption?
Where do I start? So, markets are complicated and different, but last 2 years showed us that with the energy crisis and war in Ukraine, most people want to know two things: how to pay less for energy, and then how to contribute to fight against climate change. So people need to understand many issues. They need to understand how their behavior impacts the market, what they can do to enhance market stability, and they need to be informed when to use energy, so they can help market stability. They need to know how to use less energy. So there needs to be some advice what they can do, such as, for example, use more efficient appliance, use electric vehicles. So these are important, and I think that everyone needs to understand that everyday choices impact so much, not only electricity market, but energy as a whole and whole economy. So each time we go and buy new things, we need to think, okay, it took energy, it took water, it took materials to produce. Am I buying something which is sustainable? What is my impact? Do I need this? So there are various things that we need to understand, and it is not easy, but everyone has a part to play. Did I answer?
Absolutely. Thank you, Malgorzata. That was a nice answer to the first question. And kind of taking a step back, Charmaine, how would you define energy literacy and who is responsible for fostering it?
So I think energy literacy is one of those phrases I think I've just seen probably in the last few years, really. And for me, it's really about understanding what energy is, but also kind of what role it plays in your life and why. So I think we're all very, as consumers, very guilty of kind of what was just said and not really thinking about energy. So not really thinking about the products that we buy or the lights that come on in our house. It's just assuming it's going to be there. So just that kind of first step to recognizing that actually it's a gift that we have heat and we have electricity and just understanding that it comes from somewhere. I think that's the first step to define kind of energy literacy. And I think for each consumer, and this is something I might come back to later because I feel very strongly about it, different consumers want to have a different level of energy efficiency. It's kind of very, very, you can go very shallow, or you can go very deep. So that level of how much you want to know or understand or trace back where your energy comes from, I think is it can vary. So for me, the literacy is about understanding energy, why it's there, what you use it for, and how it can be used. I mean, in terms of kind of fostering a better understanding of energy, so I think everyone is responsible for that, really. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone in kind of the commercial marketplace, but also in policy, in education. But I think there's three big groups, which I think for me are really important, who have a bit more responsibility. So there's one, which is probably some of the people attending online. So this is people who have the historical background knowledge. So some of us might have been working in kind of traditional energy sectors in kind of oil and gas and energy supply. We might have been working in the sector for 20, 30, 40 years. And we have all that historical knowledge and context of what energy used to be like and how the energy systems have been built and how we're in the situation that we have with different types of grids and networks. And actually, that historical concept is really important for understanding how we might transition to a better way of using and powering our economies. But you need to have that historical kind of background. Then I think the next group are those who are working in the energy market at the moment. So we have real life experience, whether you're in a startup or whether you're transition an oil firm or you're transitioning a retail supplier. And actually, it's that day-to-day experience, those choices that we make about goods and services that actually we need to help help people understand why we're doing that. And the third one is actually, it's maybe a little bit unfair, but I think what the energy sector lacks is obviously present company accepted, Greta, really good, excellent comms and marketing people who can understand technical concepts and simplify them to different people to really explain them. And I think it is, that those communicators are going to be the biggest ones. And you see this when people are talking about climate literacy as well. So yeah, those three people, but everyone really, but those three groups.
Thank you for excluding us for that list, Charmaine. Appreciate that. But yeah, I can absolutely agree that it is really crucial, and fostering that within companies that are growing and people who are new to the industry is super vital, as we know at GridX as well. So I just want to quote some statistics from an EY report on energy transition consumer insights. It found that more than half of 34,000 people who were surveyed want relevant energy information to come from their providers, but only 18% of consumers who recently bought a new energy product or service received support or information from their provider on the purchase. How do you think, Charmaine, we can fill this gap?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one because I think, I do think if you're selling something to someone or if you're providing a service to that, whether that's a commercial or kind of a government service, you do have a responsibility to give people the information about that. So a simple example might be energy retail supply. And there's been a lot of legislation of how to explain energy bills to consumers better. But I think there are a couple of different things which are challenging. One, which is there's a bit of a trust gap between where your information comes from and who provides that to you. And so I think sometimes energy service providers can be a bit reticent to provide as much information as they could because people don't read it, it gets put in the bin, emails get deleted. So there's a fear of overwhelming consumers with information. So I think it's a tricky one. I think there is a move, especially where there's a lot more kind of digital and app-based services to provide tailored information and services which is relevant to that client. And I think that can really help. But then there is, people get their information from other sources, and I think citizen science, social media in the right way, word of mouth is always like a really important source of information, and then government policy. And I think government policy in education is a tricky one to solve because the timescales to get that information to people is a little bit longer. And I did my dissertation at university about public communication of science, particularly around recycling, which is a very long time ago. And I think the thing that I remember finding from this is there have been so many attempts to try and communicate similar information to consumers. I didn't get to the bottom of why it didn't work, but people are just very different, and at different times in their life they've got different things going on. So it's an ongoing challenge, I suppose. That really doesn't answer your question because I don't know what the answer is, but I think it is still up to kind of that tailoring for customers.
If only we knew. Thank you, Charmaine. And Malgorzata, you were nodding your head a lot when Charmaine was talking about this trust gap. Did you want to add something to that?
So at Ember, we track a transition of the global electricity, and we produce number of reports. We have data which is free and transparent and available to everyone on our web page. And we often, ask ourselves how to project information, what will people trust, and whatever we say, we base it on facts. So we use data. So it is data at the core of whatever we say. And yeah, we produce reports. Then we have a lot of requests for interviews, and they come from different media. And we always try to think, who is our audience? What do they know? What do they care about? Who do they trust? What they will trust? This is important. And how I want them to think, what I want them to feel about what we want to say. So above all, we assume that we all want a safer planet, that we want, for us, for future generation, but we are also mindful that with energy crisis, etc., people worry about different things. So this big topic, difficult topic, but it takes a lot of teamwork, and we have very strong comms team to figure out how to tailor each message to different group. For example, when we say how much wind and solar increase their generation last year, we know that people will not remember the number, but we say that wind generation increased that much that it could power almost whole UK for a year. So we try to give audience some picture with whatever we say. Or when we explain why it matters to have more renewable energy, we highlight that this energy is more stable, less prone to prices fluctuation at the moment, because we all experience the crisis in Europe and how it affects fossil fuels. So we highlight, that it is more stable. It is homegrown energy, gives you some security. In many countries, it became less pricey. So we try to tell our audience why things matter, why they should care. I'm not sure how to answer better, but the trust is hugely important, and in general, I think that if you base what you say on facts, so you say, okay, solar increased 12% or whatever, no one can argue with the fact. So based whatever you say on the fact, not on your own opinion, but on the fact, on research, and be transparent. Be transparent with your information, where you took it, give sources so everyone can check for themselves. Thank you.
Thanks, Malgorzata. Yeah, I definitely want to come back to basing it on facts and transparency. I think that's a very key topic. But first, I just want to ask, you mentioned the energy crisis. Did you find that people's interest in energy topics really increased during this time, as it was a little bit more personal for people? And if so, how did you kind of adjust the communication around that, or your reports or things like that? And yeah, why do you think this changed, if it did?
So I definitely think that people are more interested in energy and electricity. Part of it is for maybe not the wrong reason, but for the sad reason that people cannot afford as much of energy as they used to. So now they think, okay, I'm paying 4 times. I'm based in the UK. I'm Polish, but I'm based in the UK, living here 16 years. And my electricity price increased like 4 times within, so I can afford it. I can pay it. I always was mindful, but I see now my friends and others thinking, okay, what can I do to use less? Or can I use my energy at different times? And so people are more aware. In our reports, we try to again highlight the need for understanding of the whole economy and how electricity plays a role. The speaker before us from IEA was talking about grids and how they need to be developed so we can benefit from renewable energy properly. So we try to communicate everything on electricity in the bigger picture, that it matters. It matters because you can, when you have clean electricity, it may be cheaper, but it also will help you when you have electric car. You will tank it for cheaper. What else? You will see benefits not only in your pocket, but you will see benefits in terms of impact on the planet. So you will have cleaner transport because of clean electricity. You will have cleaner heating. I talk too much, I think.
That's great, thank you. I just wanted to ask Charmaine, do you think people's appetite for energy literacy shifted during the energy crisis?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. It's quite. I mean, it's not ideal, obviously, but I really saw it force people's attention. The cost issue really forced people's attention, combined with the fact that it was just so present in media, right? When the link between I'm also based in the UK, but even when I was traveling other countries, the link between the crisis in Ukraine, energy prices, and increasingly the role of energy security. So this understanding not to be reliant on other countries for your energy security. So that is an area that companies I've worked with have looked at for many years. The fact that most countries import their energy to some extent, and I think I saw the cost being the trigger, the war also in the media being a trigger, but also that kind of understanding that actually why are we not more secure, why are we not more self-sufficient when it comes to energy. So I think it definitely did trigger that desire to understand more. And around kind of similar times when people are talking about grid upgrades, I think there were a couple of grid outages in the UK which came to the fore in terms of like train stopped working, that kind of thing. So I think that helped in kind of all these little events crystallizing people's understanding that what Malgorzata just said, the systems the way that everything is connected is so important. And I think a lot of people are starting to read that kind of filters down into day-to-day life. I was at an event yesterday and I was trying really hard not to look at someone's phone sitting behind them. I don't do that, but I noticed they had an alert from the energy provider to say, oh, you know, there's a demand flexibility event happening in the next week. Do you want to participate? Well, this person just took out their phone, they did something, I don't know what they did. And that level of interaction on a day-to-day basis with someone, which you might not have seen in 5 years ago, because people are starting to understand that the grid is connected, that they can play a role. Yeah, I think that's been a huge shift. I think there was probably a bit of that coming out of COVID as well. I think everyone saw emissions drop so massively over COVID that played a part, but definitely the price crisis has triggered that a lot.
And in line with this like newfound level of transparency, historically, and people haven't really been so in touch with their energy consumption compared to other service providers. In that same report that I quoted before, they found that only 33% of consumers find it very easy to understand and pay their energy bills, a score which is one of the lowest across a range of service providers. So clearly this is kind of increasing now with things like apps and more kind of interaction. But why do you think that was historically so low, Charmaine? And what else can we do to improve that?
I mean, energy bills have historically been very, very poorly explained to customers. So I think there is some change around that. I have to say, I still meet people in the energy sector who don't really understand what a kilowatt hour is, and they don't need to, right? But you know, if we're expecting consumers to kind of have that kind of level of literacy, actually, there's been quite a lot of research around how to kind of talk to people in a language that they understand. So rather than talking about kilowatt hours, they might talk about cost or kind of utility of what you can do in your home with that energy. So I can understand that people find it difficult to pay their energy bills, not least because it's very low on people's fun things to do in my day. You know, it's a cost, it's something that I need, it's not something that is engaging or happy with. So it's a bit worrying about the kind of pay their energy bills, because that is, you know, that should be really clear and transparent for people, and that might underpin quite a lot of things about concerns about cost and affordability. So I can totally understand why that is so low. How could it be improved? I think there's lots of steps towards trying to kind of innovate around tariffs to make them more interesting and easier to understand. I do think that there are, as homes become more electrified, so as people get EVs or are more aware of EVs, as people are more aware about the costs of energy bills on a monthly basis, maybe as kind of smart metering and kind of devices that you can actually look at your energy insights and start to gain traction. It's more visible to people. But I think the energy sector has been asking this question for a good 10 years now. And I think it needs to still play out, which is a really cop-out of a question. I used to work for a retailer, so I feel I have a deep empathy with trying to get consumers to look at their energy bills and pay them on time. But it is it's a power relationship, right? Historically, energy suppliers have had all the understanding, and they're still transitioning to be much more customer focused, which I think they're making good progress on.
Thanks, Charmaine. Maybe one solution for that comes from a question from the audience. Hans asked, should energy literacy already be started in school? If so, at what age? Malgorzata, what do you think about this?
It should. Not even at school, at home. I have a daughter who is 6 years old, and I've noticed that last year she was coming home and she was switching off the light and was saying we need to switch it off if we are not in the room, and she got that from school. So children have huge respect for their teachers, maybe sometimes even greater than for parents. So I've noticed that whatever my daughter teacher had said, she took it very seriously, and she says, I want to care about environment, I want this and that, and she knows what I do. But yes, start from early age, at home, then school.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think there's such a huge opportunity for more widely, just generally on science engineering, for kind of having the basics of energy literacy when it talks about grids, both gas and power, and understanding how electricity works, because, well, it's partly a safety thing, but actually it's a really powerful thing for children to have as a tool for climate change, but also for just understanding that their world is going to be much more electrified than historically it has been in the past. So yeah, I would definitely think that. I would agree with that. Although I'm not sure whether you want to do any practical exercises with children about the electricity grid, but that might be a bit dangerous, right?
Understandably. I still remember doing a circuit where you plug in a lemon and it eventually leads to a light. That definitely stayed with me. Malgorzata, going back to what you were saying before about facts, how can we ensure that science-based research is being passed on to consumers, to energy providers, like along the full kind of flow of information?
Oh God, I don't know again. Use numbers. Say where you took them from so people can check for themselves. I think that there is a lot of mistrust in general now following COVID pandemic and different events as well. But base everything on facts. Say where you took it from, give evidence. I don't know. This is difficult.
Charmaine, do you have anything to add?
Well, I think the using facts, I think, is a starting point. I think it's really easy for people to counteract facts with opinion these days, but you can't do anything about that. That's people's personal opinions. And one thing I think that COVID did teach me is you can get people to change their minds, which is, it's a wonderful human trait to be able to change your mind. But you can't do anything more than using data-based information, science-based information, sourcing it, and then I think keeping it very simple. I think that might be simplifying a concept into words that a consumer understands. So this is the equivalent to the one that used to be used when I was a child. This many polar bears, or this amount of power can power this many houses, and I think that is useful. But then there's always footnotes that come associated with that. So trying to keep use of those to kind of something simple just to engage people, but actually keeping it light and sourceable. I think the challenge is when it kind of goes through multiple iterations and I don't know how good people are reading science and interpreting that, particularly when it comes to kind of media and other sources. So I think that is a bit of a challenge, but that's probably where other people calling them out helps. And I think that is a role for all of us, actually, if we see something that's being misrepresented, just challenging that. There was a really great post by, I can't remember who it was now, so that's not very helpful, but about adjusting the language that you use around climate communication to be more positive and more akin to language that's used in kind of general marketing. And some people felt very strongly that you should keep it to the purity of the science. So I think there is quite a lot of debates and opinion about that, but simplicity, I think, always wins.
Yeah, nice, thank you. And that fits very well for my next question around climate communication. So where does energy literacy fit in with the wider scope of climate literacy? I think by now most people have a generally pretty good understanding of climate change and the repercussions and what we can do to prevent it. What do we need to know about energy literacy? Is it kind of the next step? How do you see it, Charmaine?
Yeah, I think I've been thinking about this quite a lot, actually, because if you think about climate change and people understanding that, and the next level that was looking at emissions, and I think about kind of 20 years ago, I think people tagged onto this idea of carbon emissions as almost like a marker of climate change because it was so present, but it's also one concept that people can really understand. So when I was looking at my career 20 years ago and looking at climate emissions, I thought, well, the biggest source of emissions is energy. That seems like a really obvious place to start. And actually, going back to an earlier point, energy underpins so much of else which is going on in the economy. So if you look at transport, that's predicated on fuel sources and energy sources. So I think it is the next stage because it's the biggest role to play. But But I do feel like we're going through that process. I do think people are becoming more energy literate when it comes to carbon, and you can trace things back, and people are much better at understanding. I think this is the role of EVs, that the carbon emissions from other fuel sources beyond electricity can actually have quite a big impact. So when you look at transport, which is the next biggest emitter, there are ways that ties back into to energy. One thing I would say though is I can see a similar trajectory needing to happen for other parts of the climate change. So when people talk about biodiversity and nature-based solutions, people don't have the same level of literacy that we're starting to get in the energy sector, and I can see that being the next area where trying to connect people really to the value of biodiversity and nature-based solutions and why they're so important to our economies, but also just a kind of the world. I think that's the next kind of literacy challenge, really. It's hard to map the role of a bird to the economy, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And Malgorzata, how do you see that at Ember? Do you think people's understanding of energy is improving, or do we need to take more steps within the scope of climate literacy so that people understand more?
Definitely people have more understanding of all issues. As Charmaine said, about electric vehicles, last year there were record sales of EV, of heat pumps in Europe as well. So, people are having greater understanding. But more can be done, for sure, always. But yeah, I'm hopeful, and I see that people understand more, and there is more discussion around important issues, and they know how to connect everything, maybe not everything, but a lot regarding energy to the climate change and impact on climate change.
Yeah, thank you. And we've had a question from the audience directed to Charmaine. You mentioned COVID and its effects it can have on people's thinking. How do we really make it stick when people have started to be more aware of their impact and keep motivation up for them so that they continue monitoring and adjusting behaviour?
Yeah, I think it's really hard because no one wants to be reminded of COVID. It feels a little bit like a dream time, I think. But I think, so there's two things. One, which is a really big picture thing, which is think of what we can all do when we all have a single focus on one thing. And so in COVID, that was around health. But the side impacts of climate change on kind of emissions for that year were sizable. So I think there's the reminder of what we can do when we kind of all unite around one particular goal. And I felt both really positive and actually really sad through COVID that we weren't doing it then about climate change. But I do think that dynamic and that narrative has changed really. And actually, I think, and I think this is answering the question, but I might get you to repeat it back, Greta. How do we keep hope and kind of keep that trajectory going? Well, I think it's being reminded of that, what you can do, but also that people's narratives have shifted. People are much more engaged in what we can do. I think the role of kind of very visible role models and demonstrating and actually leadership from all levels, from the Greta Thunbergs of this world all the way up to kind of governments who are kind of pushing on with climate change legislation, and actually kind of the role of commercial organizations who are, despite or in spite of all of those other things, are continuing their sustainability, their scope 2, their scope 3 emissions journeys without actually having to. So I think there's a really good understanding, and the way I see that coming through is part of my organization works with financial services companies, investors, asset managers, and that conversation with the people who have all these billions and trillions of pounds is changing. They talk about climate change in a slightly different way, but actually they recognize that there are reasons, commercial and implicit reasons, that we should be kind of pushing that through. So seeing the kind of change in that sector, I think, has been the thing that motivates me, and hopefully seeing that kind of come through to goods, services, rollout of heat pumps, progression in kind of decarbonising heavy industry, all of that. I think that's the thing, looking for those little markers of success. Was that the question though?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. It was how can we keep that motivation going? So yeah, I think you definitely answered it. Thank you. We've had another question asking, for people interested in learning more, where would you suggest they can get more information? Any favourite resources? Obviously starting with Ember and LCP Delta's training courses. Malgorzata, maybe you can start.
Yes, so as you said, Greta, start with Ember. And there are many organizations that provide information on climate change and what we can do. Hard to mention them all. You can see UN web pages. You can follow news about COP. There is IRENA, International Renewable Energy Agency, which provides very reliable information on progress. IEA, which obviously has flagship report World Energy Outlook, which is, which has been here for many years and updated every year, and they also work on net zero roadmap for us. Many organizations, companies. It's hard for me to name them all. Charmaine, please do add.
No, I think so. I think the IEA, ARENA, Ember, like think tanks, policy, kind of non-governmental organizations are great for statistics and kind of a bigger picture, particularly around net zero. They tend to kind of be good at bringing them together. Sometimes they can be quite, there's quite a lot of information. And I think you've got to remember that they will have different perspectives on forecasts and things like that. But that's everyone has their own perspective on things. Obviously, LCP Delta, we have some amazing training programs, but actually, if you're more looking at kind of shorter, bite-size, kind of 5-minute videos, I would really encourage people to look on companies that you trust. So commercial organizations, they tend to do quite a lot of work in outreach in terms of blogs and marketing posts. LinkedIn, which is find some people who talk about the area that you're interested in. So they might be very pro or they might be anti that area. So there's a lot of kind of black and white think pieces on LinkedIn, but that can be a really useful way of kind of just seeing two very different perspectives of the same issue. If you want to go kind of all the way back to kind of starting point, all the kind of online learning, they usually have some sort of energy, either free or very, very cheap kind of introduction to the energy sector. And then a lot of companies will have webinars, blogs, things which are, they're marketing, but they're kind of education. I think a lot of companies take their roles about widening understanding of the sector quite seriously. And those are usually free and they can lead you on to other ideas. So those would be my big ones for updates. A lot of actually universities will do kind of some short kind of 5-minute videos which are intros, so poking around YouTube actually is quite good as well, but you can get a lot of terrible things. And actually someone suggested we should start off whatever the version of TikTok is, so energy talk, is that right? I don't know, I'm not on TikTok, but which is reaching a slightly different market, but actually would be a fantastic thing, and I'm sure someone is doing that.
Thanks, Charmaine. Energy talk, news to me, but I love the idea. So let's chat about it. And also company pages, of course, you can start with GridX. Going on to social media, I think you aroused a really interesting issue of LinkedIn, social media. Often it can reinforce people's same ideas and they can go into this bubble where they don't get a lot of broad information. Do you think there is a risk of that, and how can that be avoided?
Yeah, I think, there is a risk. I think it's just keep yourself on your toes and recognize that everyone comes from everyone, I think, has a level of vested interest in something. It might be for good, or it might not be. I think you'll be able to put those bits and pieces together when you look at things like Ember or our work, or like the Carbon Brief, or people whose role it is to kind of poke around and be a bit more independent. But I think it's really helpful for people to understand, within the context of the energy transition, where these kind of opposing views are coming from and why people are there. I mean, that's part of feeding this literacy, because humans, especially when it comes to social media, are not very good at having a balanced argument or on there for some reason. So I think it is really important. Hydrogen is a really good example of this. So I'd encourage everyone to go and have a poke around about the kind of the two opposing views around hydrogen, because there's, you know, still very early in that market.
And we also talked about university short courses. Do you think we will see more university courses in the future, specifically focused on energy? And do you think people need to study energy to then be in the energy industry? Charmaine, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I didn't study energy specifically. I did a very general degree. I think there is a kind of, I feel like it's like a year's worth of just getting up to speed of why energy is so complicated for people to do when they first join, but it can be quicker and it doesn't necessarily need to be that long. I do think I have seen more specialist courses around energy. You know, initially that was about focusing on renewables. There's a course I think run around London University, which is just focusing on data in energy. It's a master's just about energy data, which I thought was really interesting. But I think you can learn a lot of it. You don't have to be from the sector, you don't have to study it to get involved with it. You just need to be kind of curious, to kind of have an understanding or open to understanding energy. And then kind of just, for me, the most important trait is this kind of ability to have like a systems thinking, putting all these bits together, because the energy sector is now even more complex than it used to be, and it's all interconnected. But Malgorzata might have a different view on that.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you. Yes, you can go and study energy and all related topics. I did this, but that's not the only way. You can learn in many ways. You can once you get interested, you can really find information in different places. You can start through learning through work. You can volunteer. You can reach out to people. So there is no one way to learn about something.
Yeah, I think, well, the other thing is around just poking around your own home and kind of trying to understand how your home energy works. I think that's a really good way of just starting to understand things. I don't want to do too much promotion of YouTube, but, you know, working out how to kind of, you know, rewire a plug or fix your plumbing, I think is a really good starting point for starting to understand some of those basics about electricity or thermodynamics or anything like that. Not that you need that to work in the energy sector, but yeah, it just connects you to something.
Thanks, Charmaine. And we've only got time for one more question, so I want to direct this to both of you. Charmaine, you kind of touched on this before, and I think there's no real answer here, but let's give it a try. The energy landscape is changing so rapidly. What recommendations do you have for improving energy literacy to ensure informed decision-making in the future?
Okay, so I think there is a need to understand that you might not know everything. You might be in a silo of area. Your area of work might just be kind of, you might be thinking in that silo. So to be understanding that the energy system is connected, and you might need to think about other things that don't seem relevant at first to better understand the context of which your product is working in. So for example, if you work in the EV sector, you might not think you need to know about gas boilers, but actually gas boilers are changing. We're going to roll out electrified heating more widely across Europe. And actually those electrified heating can come into conflict or into complement with EV charging in the home. So I think it's think beyond what your and explore beyond what your immediate passion is, but also just keep learning, so keep reading.
Malgorzata?
So to add to Charmaine, yes, and to you, Greta, yes, we don't know everything yet, but I think that we have many reasons to be hopeful, and we should focus on solutions. And we have many technologies now which are already helping. We've seen people installing more PVs on the rooftops, for example. Again, electric cars. We have more solutions now than we had before, and there is reason to be hopeful and just focus on what we can do and try to change, even if you don't know exactly everything what you would like to know.
That's true, absolutely. Challenge your own opinions, yeah. Well, thank you so much to the two of you for that really insightful discussion. I think people are definitely interested in energy literacy, and I'm excited to see where it goes in the future. Thank you both so much for the insights.
Thanks very much.
You.